My name is Linda. I'm 58 years old, married to my husband Mark for what feels like a lifetime. 33 years to be exact. We've built a quiet life in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. Our two kids are grown and scattered across different states now. Living lives I watch mostly through photos and the occasional Sunday phone call. Mark works in corporate finance and has been with the same company for nearly 20 years. I used to be a school librarian, but I took early retirement last year. Lately, I've found myself filling time with gardening, reading, and attending the occasional charity function with Mark, dutifully playing the role of the supportive wife. It was one of those charity dinners that changed everything. The invitation came from Mark's boss, Gregory Nash, a name I'd heard over the years, but never met in person. Mark described him as sharp, traditional, and a bit distant, the kind of man who didn't waste time with pleasantries, but held a commanding presence in every room he entered. The event was being hosted at a private club downtown, one of those old-world places with dark wood paneling, soft piano music, and waiters who seemed to glide rather than walk. I remember feeling slightly self-conscious that evening. I had taken extra care with my hair, chose a navy dress I hadn't worn in years, and added a touch of lipstick that hadn't seen daylight since our youngest graduated college. I couldn't say why I tried so hard, it was just dinner, but something in me wanted to feel visible again. When we arrived, Mark introduced me to his colleagues with pride. I shook hands, made polite conversation, and tried to stay interested as they talked shop. Then Gregory approached. He was taller than I imagined, with silver street hair, a clean-shaven jaw, and eyes that held you for a moment too long. His voice was calm, but there was something in it, something measured. "You must be Linda," he said, extending his hand. "Mark's told me you were once a librarian. I always thought librarians were the keepers of secrets." I smiled politely. Only the good ones. His laugh was quiet, genuine. He didn't move on quickly like the others had. Instead, he stood there a while, asking about books I loved, authors I admired. He asked questions no one had asked me in years about the things that lit me up inside. Later, at the table, I found myself seated between Mark and Gregory. The dinner was slow and drawn out, full of polite clinks of silverware and business anecdotes. At one point, someone mentioned a local author I admired. I chimed in, and Gregory turned toward me again. "I had no idea you were so passionate about writing," he said, almost as if it surprised him. I was about to respond when I felt it. His hand. Just a light brush against mine beneath the table. It could have been accidental, but it lingered for a moment too long to dismiss as nothing. His fingers grazed my knuckles, warm and deliberate, before pulling away. I didn't look at him immediately. My heart had already started its quiet pounding, and I was suddenly aware of how warm the room had gotten. I glanced over. He was focused on someone else speaking, as if nothing had happened at all. But when his eyes flicked back toward me a few minutes later, there was a softness there, a quiet acknowledgement. I excused myself to the restroom not long after, needing a moment to breathe, to process what I was feeling. It wasn't attraction in the teenage sense, nor was it fear. It was something subtler. I felt seen. When I returned to the table, Mark was deep in conversation, and Gregory was sipping from a glass of red wine. He looked up at me as I sat down, and for just a second, his hand brushed mine again, this time less by chance. We didn't speak of it. We didn't need to, but I knew, even then, that something had shifted. Something quiet. Something unexpected. And even though I told myself it was probably nothing, I couldn't deny the stir inside me. Like the first page of a story, I didn't know I had been waiting to read. The days after the dinner passed quietly, at least on the surface. Mark went back to his usual routine, early mornings, coffee in a travel mug, quick kisses on the cheek, and long hours at the office. I busied myself with the usual things, tending to my small rose garden, sorting through old photos, and wandering the local farmers market on Wednesdays. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of Gregory's hand brushing mine, the way his eyes had lingered on me with something that felt like recognition. It had been so long since someone looked at me like that, not out of obligation, not out of habit, but with genuine curiosity. Mark loved me. I never doubted that. But love after 30 years becomes quiet, familiar, folded into routines. Gregory's glance reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten, what it feels like to be noticed as a woman, not just a wife. A few days later, Mark came home and mentioned that Gregory had invited a few couples from the office to his home for a weekend gathering. He wants everyone to feel more connected. It's just a casual thing, he said, loosening his tie. Gregory insisted you come, said he enjoyed talking with you. I tried to act nonchalant, but I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. Did he? Mark didn't seem to catch it. He simply nodded and disappeared into the kitchen to warm up leftovers. That Saturday, we drove to Gregory's house, a beautiful colonial-style home tucked into a wooded stretch outside the city. The air was cool and sweet with early spring, and soft jazz floated out from the open windows. The gathering was small, 10, maybe 12 people, all mingling with drinks in hand, laughter echoing off the stone patio. Gregory greeted us at the door, his usual poised demeanor wrapped in casual charm. "Linda," he said with a warm smile, "you made it." "I'm glad." His hand rested on the small of my back for just a second as he ushered us inside. It was subtle, but deliberate. My body registered it before my mind had a chance to catch up. As the evening wore on, I found myself drawn into conversation with Gregory again. We stood near the fire pit in the backyard, the soft crackle of flames between us. Mark had wandered off to talk shop with some of the other men. Gregory handed me a glass of white wine. "You seemed distant earlier." "Everything all right?" I hesitated, not wanting to admit how often I'd thought about our vast interaction. "Just thinking," I said finally. "Sometimes I feel like I've turned invisible since retiring." He studied me for a moment. "You're far from invisible, Linda." There was something about the way he said my name that made it feel like a secret being gently spoken aloud. I glanced at the fire, feeling its heat on my face. "You're kind to say that." "It's not kindness," he said softly. "It's truth." We stood in silence for a moment, just the two of us beneath the darkening sky. Then gently he reached for my hand. This time it wasn't by accident. His thumb brushed across the top of my fingers in slow, deliberate circles. The gesture wasn't overt, wasn't demanding. It just was. "I shouldn't," I began, but the words caught in my throat. "You haven't done anything wrong," he replied calmly, "and neither have I." I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't lean into him either. I just let the moment hang there between us, like the scent of smoke and jasmine in the air. Eventually, someone called from the patio and we separated. But something in me had shifted again, deeper this time. It wasn't just about being noticed. It was about feeling awake, like something within me had quietly stirred from years of sleep. When Mark and I left later that night, Gregory's eyes found mine once more. No words, just that same soft glance, acknowledging what had passed without a trace of guilt or pressure. Only understanding. On the drive home, Mark hummed to the radio, content and unaware. And I, sitting beside him, stared out at the moonlit road ahead, unsure of where this new path was leading, but unable to pretend it didn't exist. The week that followed felt different, like the rhythm of my life had subtly shifted a half step. Nothing was outwardly changed. Mark still read the paper every morning. I still folded laundry while old jazz played from our kitchen radio. But inside me, something was unraveling. Or maybe it was unfolding. I wasn't sure. Gregory hadn't called, hadn't written. Not that he had a reason to. There had been no promises, No exchange numbers, nothing overt. Just a touch, a glance, a quiet energy that lingered long after the moment had passed. But then came Friday. Mark mentioned over dinner that Gregory had invited him to a new client dinner downtown. "It's mostly for appearances," he said between bites, "of roasted chicken. Spouses are welcome, but I told him you probably wouldn't want to go to another long night of boring business talk." I didn't answer immediately. I watched the candle flickering in the center of the table, feeling the weight of the unspoken questions settling in the air. "What if I did want to go?" I said finally, surprising even myself. Mark looked up. "You sure? I could use a night out." And that's how I found myself, 2 nights later, in a soft burgundy dress and a silk scarf around my shoulders, walking into a quiet, upscale restaurant with low lighting and polished mahogany walls. Gregory was already there, speaking with someone near the wine display. But when he saw me, his expression changed. There was no smile at first, just a pause, a long look, then a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "Linda," he said once we were all seated, "you look elegant." I thanked him quietly, careful not to overplay it with Mark sitting right beside me. Still, there was something unspoken passing between us again, a current invisible to everyone else. Dinner moved slowly. Conversations spun around quarterly results, client expectations, market shifts. I nodded and sipped my wine, but most of my awareness was centered on the space between Gregory and me. There were no touches this time, no glances. That would draw suspicion, just restraint wrapped in decorum. But beneath it, a spark glowed steady. After dessert, Mark excused himself to take a work call. Gregory leaned slightly toward me once we were alone. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. He studied my face. "You haven't stopped thinking about it." It wasn't a question, and I didn't deny it. "I've been married most of my life," I said quietly. "I don't want to be the kind of woman who gets swept up in something foolish." He nodded, and for a moment, I thought he might back away. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "I don't think you're foolish. At all. I think you've just been quiet for too long." That struck something in me, a part I didn't even know had been aching to be heard. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "Not tonight. Maybe not ever. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'd like that. No pressure, just truth." I didn't respond right away, but I didn't look away either. Mark returned a few minutes later, and the night whelmed down. We exchanged goodbyes. Gregory shook Mark's hand with professional warmth, and when he turned to me, his touch lingered no longer than etiquette would allow. But his eyes told a different story. On the ride home, Mark talked about projections and budgets. I stared out the window, the city lights casting golden patterns across my thoughts. I felt suspended between 2 lives, the one I had lived so faithfully, and the one that had started to breathe just beneath it. When we pulled into the driveway, Mark squeezed my hand. "Thanks for coming tonight," he said with a smile. It meant a lot. I smiled back, but my heart was far from settled. And for the first time in years, I found myself lying awake deep into the night, not from worry, but from wondering. A week passed. Then 2. I went about my days like always. Grocery runs, weekend brunch with a neighbor, sorting through spring decorations in the attic. But beneath the ordinary, something soft and persistent tugged at me. Gregory hadn't reached out. He hadn't needed to. That dinner, that final exchange of words had left its mark. And though I couldn't quite name what was growing inside me, I knew it had to do with more than him. It was about me, about the woman I had tucked away beneath layers of habit and loyalty and time. One morning, while Mark was shaving and humming, out of tune in the bathroom, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink. staring at my reflection in the window above it. Not just looking, seeing, really seeing. My face wasn't the same as it was at 30 or 40, but there was something fuller now, something honest, lived in, and beautiful in its own way. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Gregory. "I'm headed to the gallery opening you. Mentioned Saturday at 4. You said the Monet exhibit always moved you. If you happen to be there too, I'd enjoy a walk through the campuses with you." He hadn't asked to meet. He hadn't even said my name. Just a quiet offering. A choice. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. That Saturday, I didn't tell Mark where I was going. He was busy in the garage, sorting tools and muttering about a leaky pipe. I drove downtown, parked near the museum, and walked up the stone steps feeling like someone both new and very old. The Monet exhibit was softly lit, with golden frames glowing under track lights and brush strokes that danced in impressionistic blur. I wandered for a while alone, pausing in front of water villas, letting the peace of the colors settle something inside me. Then I saw him. Gregory stood near a window, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wasn't searching for me. He wasn't pacing. He was simply waiting. When our eyes met, he smiled, not with expectation, but recognition. I walked toward him, each step quiet on the polished floor. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure I would," I answered. "I wasn't sure either," he replied. We didn't speak for a while after that. We simply walked, through the rooms, through the colors, through the silence that spoke louder than any conversation could. At one point, we stood in front of a painting of a misty morning garden. His voice was low when he finally broke the quiet. "I know you love your husband. I'm not here to threaten that. But I wanted to be someone who reminded you you're still allowed to feel." "More?" I swallowed hard. I didn't expect this. I wasn't looking for anything. I know, that's what makes it real. I turned to him. "So what now?" He shrugged gently. "That's not up to me." There was no kiss, no grand gesture. Just the quiet connection of two people who had found something tender in an unlikely place. Something that couldn't and shouldn't be rushed or named too quickly. As we walked out of the exhibit, the afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting light across our shadows. At the door, I touched his hand, just a brush of fingers. This time, it was me who lingered. "I'm not sure where this leaves me," I said softly. He met my eyes. Maybe not knowing is okay. And somehow it was. I drove home with the window down, the spring air lifting the ends of my hair. I didn't feel like I had cheated. I didn't feel like I had betrayed. I felt awakened, alive. That night, I sat next to Mark on the couch as he read his paper. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in a long while, I wanted to talk. Not about Gregory, but about us. About the things we stopped noticing. About who we used to be, and what might still be waiting for us if we dared to reach for it. Sometimes the most surprising part of being seen by someone else is how it helps you finally see yourself again.